Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 660, and today's date is May 6, 2015, and the title of this episode is The Economic Storm Has Reached the U.S., and it will wreak havoc on the world. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we're going to head right out to Greece because the situation there is getting worse day by day, and we see the two institutions, the IMF and the EU, basically, they're obstructing negotiations with Greece. The main argument of the institutions for not securing a deal was that the Greek side had not submitted comprehensive proposals. Now it becomes apparent that the proposals have been submitted and substantial concessions have made towards clinching an honest compromise. But the IMF considers reforms in pensions and labor as its red lines, while it is not so strict about the primary surplus. The IMF is also considering a debt write-off to make it viable. On the other hand, the EU considers the primary surplus an important issue and is against any debt write-down, while it is not so strict about reforms in labor laws and pensions. The overall result is that the institutions have red lines everywhere. Pensions, labor laws, primary surplus. With these facts, there cannot be any type of compromise. So right now, Greece is in limbo. And we see Greece is getting nervous. They have a huge payment coming up. They just paid something like 220 million euros. They have something like 700 million euros coming up. And it seems like they're implementing a form of capital controls on the people. Greece has revealed it will introduce a surcharge for all cash point withdrawals and financial transactions in a desperate attempt to raise funds. They're hoping by doing this, they will stop the people from withdrawing their money from the bank. And they're hoping to raise from these fees about $180 million euros. The penalty will be about €1 for every 1,000 euros transacted. While the measure is unlikely to impact on a day-to-day withdrawals, Greece hopes it will deter citizens clearing out their bank accounts. So we can see already they need this money to stay in the banks. They can't have it being taken out, and we know a lot of the Greek people are very nervous. The pensioners are very nervous. They're coming in, they're taking their money. A lot of people are withdrawing their money because they're nervous about what's going to happen. They don't want to be Cyprus. Basically what that is one day the Cyprus people went to sleep on a Friday. Saturday they woke up, and guess what? The banks were shut down. And the government, the central bankers said, listen, we're going to take your money. And you can't take your money out, and we're going to implement capital controls. It will be stuck in there for over a year. And we'll replace your money with worthless bank stock. And of course, they told them it was going to be 8-10%, and it went all the way up to 47%. Now, we understand the economies around the world, they're not doing well. Europe is not doing well. We see signs in the UK. We see it in Germany, Canada, Australia. Yes, here in the U.S. But the Eurozone, their retail sales were weaker than expected in March. Data showed on Wednesday turning negative on a monthly basis for the first time since last September. The European Union Statistics Office, Eurostat, said retail sales in the 19 countries sharing the euro fell by 0.8% month on month. So it shows us that things are really starting to slow up. Things are starting to fall apart. And here in the United States, what do we see? We see that every day more and more information comes out to show us that the economy is not doing well. And we can see right now U.S. economic confidence has just crashed most since July. Despite record stock prices and all the weather excuses for the current economic weakness, the Fed promising that growth is here and everything is rosy and everything is fine and everything is going as planned, Gallup's U.S. Economic Confidence Index plunged by 9 points last week, the largest week-to-week drop since last July. And we can see right now is that the main driver was a collapse of hope as outlook fell to November lows. People are looking at what is going on. They see their strip malls becoming empty, stores closing in the malls. They see that they're putting their house up for sale and it's getting more and more difficult to sell their home. They see that, my job is in jeopardy. I might be the next one laid off because 2 of my coworkers were just laid off. And they're reporting back to me saying, I cannot find the same job. It's getting more and more difficult. I don't understand this. Unemployment, the government is telling us, the central bankers are telling us, it's at 5.5%. But I can't find work. And we can see that people are starting to realize something is going on here, and it doesn't make sense. ADP just reported their employment report, and this is the biggest miss in 4 years and missing for 3 straight months. April printed a very weak 169,000 jobs when they were expecting it to be over 200. Even worse, February and March was revised even lower. This is the lowest that we've seen for a long time. Manufacturing jobs lost about 10,000 jobs in April, and the goods producing sector lost about 8,000 jobs. And we can see right now we are in a downward trend. If we go back to November of 2014, we see their numbers came in at 284. December of 2014, the number came down to 275. January, 220. February, 200. All blamed on the bad weather, by the way. People just couldn't get out there to get those jobs. March, 175, and here we are in April at 169. It is a downward trend. It is getting harder and harder for people to find good jobs, and more people are being laid off. And we understand while this is happening, retail sales are plummeting, house sales are going nowhere. As the interest rates tick up a little bit, it knocks more and more people out of the area where they can afford to purchase a house. And when this happens, we see mortgage applications, they dip down. And as of the week of May 1st, mortgage applications dropped another 4.6%. The American people are just tapped out. They don't have the funds, they don't have the job, they don't have the disposable income. Most of the people today are living paycheck to paycheck. It is getting harder and harder. A lot of the graduates coming out of college have this huge amount of student loans, and they can't find that high-paying jobs. It's very difficult. And the government right now is using the subprime mortgages to pump up the housing recovery. I mean, it seems hard to believe, but the government is purposely recreating the mortgage debacle of 2007, and we discussed this many times. And basically what it's doing, it's luring the unsuspected blue-collar worker in, saying, this is a great time to purchase a home. Prices are very high. I can get a mortgage even though I have bad credit. I don't have that much for the down deposit. And it's the same thing that occurred back in 2007. Right now, the market is at its height. It's starting to fall. Prices are coming down. People are having a very difficult time selling their homes. They're on the market longer and longer. I see where I am right now, and I look around and I see houses on the market 60, 90, 120 days. And what we're seeing is that the government right now, with Freddie and Fannie, they implemented these new programs that allow people to come in with subprime credit, no deposit, and they can get a mortgage. But when we look at the situation here, and we put it all together, what do we have? We have the employment to population ratio at 35-year lows. Now, of course, they're trying to convince us the housing market, the retail market, the economy is doing better. We have had a stagnant real wage growth since 2008, as low-paying service Obama jobs have replaced higher-paying production jobs. We have real median household income at 1989 levels and still 9% below the 2008 peak. We have mortgage applications 56% below the 2005 peak and hovering at 1996 levels. We still have 4 million homeowners underwater in their mortgages. We have housing starts languishing 40% below the long-term average. We have home ownership rate at 63.8%, at quarter of a century lows. We have mortgage rates at all-time lows. And still, they can't keep this housing market propped up. It's completely falling apart. And we have home prices soaring far above the inflation rate and wages because the Federal Reserve, in collaboration with the federal government, decided to create another housing bubble. If people do not have the money and they're not receiving the wages, and home ownership is at its lowest, how possibly is the real estate market doing well? It isn't. It's an illusion. It's fake. It's phony. These prices that you see are going to come down. And they're going to come down hard. You thought they came down hard back in 2008, going into 2009, going to 2010? It's going to be much worse. Because most of Americans are out of this market. Most of them have already lost their homes. They were foreclosed, short-sold. Some of them, yes, came back into the market, even though they don't have the ability to pay their mortgage payments. They really didn't have the money to put down again, but they wanted to own a home. And basically what's going to happen is they're going to be screwed once again. Because when this comes down, it's going to be awful. It's going to be horrific. I mean, first-time home buyers make up around 29% of all home buyers, near the all-time low. Normally, first-time home buyers are around 45%. So you can see already we're having a problem. And especially with the college graduates coming out now with this heavy student loan burden, and without getting those jobs, guess what? It's going to get worse. I mean, you can get an FHA loan with a credit score as low as 500, as long as you have a 10% down payment. And once you hit 580, guess what? You only need 3.5%. Or there are some banks that say, you know what? We'll do 0. The FHA is exempt from the qualified mortgage requirement of 43% debt to income ratio. Many loans right now have a debt to income ratio around 55%. We are back where we started, but it's much worse. And it's not getting better. We see U.S. productivity has now suffered for the first consecutive quarter since 1993. U.S. output per hour for the non-farm business plunged 1.9%. This follows a 2.1% slump in the fourth quarter of 2014 and is the first consecutive quarterly plunge since 93. That's 1993. This was driven by a 0.2% decline in output as hours worked increased 1.7%, with manufacturing productivity suffering a 1.1% drop in the first quarter. Well, listen, welcome to the new normal. You are going to be working a lot more and you'll be making a lot less. And this is what we're seeing in the market today. We're seeing people working many jobs, long hours for lower pay. And this trend is continuing. It is not getting better. Manufacturing is not going to get better. Why? Because the American people are not out there purchasing. They don't have the funds. And it's self-evident in the Baltic Dry Index. It has fallen again by 5 points. We're down to 575. And this is the raw material, like I've been saying in all my reports, that is used for manufacturing. And right now, where is the economy going? It's not improving. It's falling apart. And I know the talking heads on the financial networks, the corporate media, they keep spurting out, well, with our unemployment at only 5.5% and GDP in the positive range, we're seeing growth. No. What they're not talking about is that these numbers are manipulated. Yes, on face value, if you go with the manipulated numbers, yeah, you could say, yeah, the economy might, make it. But these are manipulated numbers. That's what they're not telling you. They're making you believe that these are the real numbers and this is what we're going by. They're trying to make you believe that the stock market, this is completely natural. This is how the market works. No, it is completely manipulated for the central bankers, for the elite. They need to keep the system propped up, and this is why they're doing it. And while they're doing all of this, they're trying to put forth more laws. They're tricking the American people, trying to convince them that everything we're doing is for the best interest of the American people. And we know, no, it is not. I mean, take, for instance, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We know this is not for the people. Why? Because it's secret. The people can't see this. And let me just say, to see the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this is what you have to go through. That you need to be a member of Congress. You got to go to a classified briefing and leave your staff and cell phone at the door. If you're a member who wants to read the text, you've got to go to a room in the basement of the Capitol Visitor Center and be handed the Trans-Pacific Partnership one section at a time. You'll be watched over as you read it and forced to hand over any notes you make before leaving. And no matter what, you can't discuss the details of what you read. So what does this tell you? If it's so secret that nobody can discuss it, it is not for the people. Because if it was truly for the people, they wouldn't care. They would say, look, see, read it. It is totally for you. That's why Obamacare, they didn't want anyone reading that. Because it was not for the American person. It was for the insurance companies. It was for the bankers. It was to raise revenue. The same thing with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It is for the government. It is for the central bankers. It is for the corporations. It is no way at all good for the people. And we can see throughout Europe, they're protesting. Anti-TTIP activists have repeatedly complained that the deal negotiated without due government or expert oversight would benefit big corporations while undermining environment and labor standards, and it would not be good for the people. More than 1.7 million people in Europe have signed a petition against the proposed TTIP agreement, as well as against ratifying a similar deal with Canada known as the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. The people are speaking out saying, we have a problem with this. And the government is continually trying to tell everyone, this is good for the people. Trust us. Well, you know what? After all the lies you've been telling us, we do not trust you whatsoever. You know how we'll trust you? Prove it. Let us see the document. Let us go through it. And we will be the judge if this is good for us or not. But guess what? They won't do that because they know that this is no way, no how, impossible to be good for the people. Now, we understand the United States is continually pushing sanctions on Russia. They want Europe to go ahead and renew the sanctions, and Europe is looking at this saying, well, it's really hurting our economies, and we're starting to suffer from this and lose billions of dollars. And we don't know if we really want to go along with this, and the United States is saying, you have to. These are sanctions against Russia, but don't tell anyone that we're continually importing oil from Russia. And this is really starting to hurt not just the European countries, but it's hurting Japan. The cost to Japanese business of sanctions imposed against Russia by Western countries could be $10 billion, according to the Russian Trade Mission in Japan. Japan and Russia, they do trade goods. Japan imports about $22.2 billion worth of goods from Russia, and Russia exports about $8.2 billion to Japan. And there could be a loss for Japan because of these sanctions. And we're seeing a lot of these countries getting hit by these sanctions. We see Russia and China, they are making their own trade agreements with different nations in the Asian area. We see the Vietnam-Russia trade agreement. They're going to be signing this, and it's going to be completed. For signing, both countries will consider using their national currencies instead of U.S. dollars in trade after agreeing in principle to establish a free trade zone. And we're starting to see this a lot in all the different countries where they're saying, you know what, we're just going to bypass the dollar. Let's trade in our own currency. And this is really gaining steam around the world, and everyone is looking to bypass the dollar at this time. China right now is one step closer to becoming the world's gold hub. China's ambitions to become the world's leading gold trading hub and international financial hub have taken another step forward. China, the world's largest gold producer and buyer, feels its market weight should entitle it to be a price setter for gold bullion. It is asserting itself at a time when the established benchmark, the century-old London gold fix, is under scrutiny because of long-running allegations of price manipulation, and we know the precious metal industry is completely manipulated. And this new Chinese gold price benchmark is going to launch by the end of this year. The Shanghai Gold Exchange opened last year and trades in contracts for physical gold. So you need the physical. It has quickly been establishing itself as the fastest growing gold trading hub in the world, and as there are many participants in the gold market that are now moving away from the COMEX. There are many different banks that have joined in with this: Australia, New Zealand Banking Group, Standard Chartered, HSBC, and many others have joined in with this. And we're going to have to watch the precious metal industry to see how this really affects it when this thing goes completely live this fall. And this could make gold go right up. And we're going to have to watch to see how this plays out. Now, out in Baltimore, we understand there were protests, there were riots, and the U.S. government was involved with agent provocateurs, basically kicking this whole thing up. And they had many different agendas associated with this, and one of them was trying to push martial law in this country. Now, they tried to kick it off. There were many protests happening around the country, and they really tried to push this very hard. The other agenda is nationalizing the police, and we saw it in Ferguson, and we're starting to see it all over the place. And they've been doing this for quite a while. DHS has been giving local law enforcement machine guns, fatigues, Stingray listening devices, tanks. And we can see right now, every time one of these situations where there's protests and then there's riots, the federal government steps in and they want to nationalize and take over the police force. They want everything being reported back up on a federal level. And right now, Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake announced Wednesday a new partnership with the Department of Justice that gives the federal authorities the power to investigate and perhaps change the city's policing practices. And of course, they're going to give them federal money, and they will all then report to the federal government. This is basically nationalizing the police force so they can control all local law enforcement in the country. DHS has been doing this, and we can see right now this is part of the agenda because they know when the system comes down, they need all law enforcement in line with what they're planning to do, and that is to control the riots, go pick up those people who are a threat to their authority, and we can see their plan is in motion at this time. We see other countries doing the same thing. I mean, France right now, and of course this is all being done because of terror, and this is what they use. They use fear to make people do things they normally wouldn't do, to give up their rights. And we can see it is working in Canada. They're trying to fight it. It's working in Australia, France, Belgium, UK, U.S., other countries. And in France, we see that France right now, as we know, they're banning cash because, terrorists use cash, criminals use cash. And they're trying to reduce freedom, privacy, and basically they're enacting a law very similar to the Patriot Act. But the ban on cash will restrict the use of cash by French residents, and they will not be able to trade or transact in certain denominations. On September 2015, these measures will be implemented, prohibiting French residents from making cash payments of more than 1,000 euros, down from the current limit of 3,000 euros. They will also limit foreign tourists on currency payments, which is at 10,000 euros, down from 15,000 euros. We can see right now they've implemented a new set of laws that will allow the government to tap the phone lines, go through mobile phones, intercept emails, take secret photographs, enter homes, to place microphones without preliminary approval of a judge. You can see what they are doing at this point. They are spying on all their citizens. They need to know what everyone is doing. The same thing is happening here in the United States. And all these countries, they're violating the rights of the people. Here in the United States, they're violating the Fourth Amendment, but they don't care because they understand when this system comes crumbling down, they realize it's going to be a disaster. And they're nervous about those people organizing groups of saying, you know something? I believe it was the central bankers. I believe it was the government who did this to us. We need to remove them. We need to do what they did during the revolution. Get rid of the bankers. Give the people the rights. Because you can see the same thing is happening. We are headed towards the same exact thing once again. Our founding fathers told us that this would happen. That this was not permanent. That this, I believe they said it was going to last about 100 years. Well, it lasted a little bit longer. But guess what? We're going to have to end up fighting once again. And when I say fight, it doesn't mean with weapons. It doesn't mean go out there and kill people. It means do it peacefully. A peaceful revolution, a peaceful protest will bring in more people. The voice will get louder. It will get stronger. It will grow. It will force the government as it grows to listen. And if they don't listen, it grows even more. And before you know it, the government will have to listen. And of course, they don't like to. They will try to use force against the people. And this is what always happens throughout history. And every time they use force, they will be on the losing side. Because the people are fighting something that's near and deep to them. The government is just fighting for power. And the people, the population of the people, will always outnumber the government. And we can see, at this point, we're at a crossroads now. Do we want to continue with this system? Or is it time for us to say, you know what, enough's enough? It is time for us to speak out. It is time for us to gather and peacefully protest the bankers, the government, and say, we're not doing this anymore. You do not represent us anymore. And that time is coming. There will be a moment in time where we will be able to do this. Now, out in Ukraine, we understand the U.S. government, central bankers, powers that be, they want war. And they'll do whatever it takes to get war. And right now we see that Ashton Carter is out there. And he's saying that the United States is now equipping the Ukrainian government forces with defensive weapons. And we know there's also lethal weapons being brought into here. We also know Congress passed a bill that will allow lethal weapons to be shipped off to Ukraine. But right now, let's just say they're using defensive weapons. because they need to counter the independent supporters in eastern Ukraine, who the U.S. military alleges are preparing for a fresh offensive. Ashton Carter says it does appear that the Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine are preparing for another round of military action. Really? Well, let's think about this for a second. Ukraine tried an offensive back late 2014 going into 2015, and the southeastern people pushed them back. They were losing. The southeastern people were headed towards Mariupol. They were headed towards Kiev. They could have gone all the way, but they stopped. They said, you know something? Let's have peace. Russia put forth the Minsk II agreement, because the Minsk I agreement, no one, abided by it. They just decided, forget that. We want to get the southeastern section. So the southeastern people could have overrun the entire country and taken it over, but they didn't. And the U.S. government, NATO, Kiev, wants us to believe that they decided to stop. They wanted peace to allow Kiev to rearm, to build up their armed forces, to get training from the U.S. government? No, it makes no sense, does it? Why would they stop if they had the upper hand? What benefit would it be to them? There'd be no benefit. So what they're telling us right now is a lie. It's propaganda. What they're doing is telling you they're getting ready for an offensive. They were the losing force. They are now building up their force, and they are getting ready for an offensive against the southeastern people once again. This is what's going on in Ukraine. And they're trying to convince everyone that no, Russia and the southeastern people, they're getting ready. Well, we had the Open Skies Treaty, Denmark, U.S., Germany, they've all been flying over the borders. They have not seen anything. There is no buildup whatsoever. They can't even show proof of satellite imagery. And I'm not talking about the black and white 1970 photoshopped images. I'm talking about the crystal clear color HD 3D images that they can see the insignia of the Russian forces on the uniforms or on the tanks, or at least show us the tanks, at least show us the forces, but they can't do this. You know why? Because they don't exist. The satellites are positioned right above. They can do this at any time. Now, the OSCE, they are saying they're unable to confirm the heavy weaponry withdrawal in Ukraine. And they're saying that we can't tell if Kiev is actually withdrawing because they're moving equipment all around. Some equipment ends right back to the contact line, then it's taken away, then it's moved back, and this is continually happening. It's basically what they're doing is they're trying to confuse the OSCE, and we can see right now the Minsk II agreement, the ceasefire agreement, was basically to have a ceasefire, establish a buffer zone between the southeastern area and the Ukrainian government, and they were both supposed to withdraw their heavy weaponry. But we can see that Kiev is continually shelling many of the areas in the southeastern area. They haven't stopped, and violations have been ongoing, and they've been recorded. But again, there's no penalty on Kiev with the Minsk II agreement. All penalties lay on the southeastern people and Russia. So if Kiev does something wrong, there's absolutely no penalties whatsoever. I don't understand how this agreement was made with no penalties on Kiev, but it's absolutely ridiculous. It is one-sided. We see now that U.S. warships are no longer going to accompany British or U.S. ships through the Strait of Hormuz. It seems that the propaganda has run its course. They were out there telling us that Iran is evil, they're the enemy, they're going to fire upon any ship. And now they're out there saying that there has been no more incidences out in that area, so we don't need the U.S. warships in that area. Well, there was never an incident. Basically, this was a financial matter with this Maersk Tigris ship. They owed a debt. They had a court order. They seized the ship, and once the debt is paid, they'll let the ship go. That's it. There was nothing else going on. All this was propaganda, and the United States government central bankers used it to convince everyone that Iran is ready to attack. But guess what? They're not doing it. It was complete propaganda, and there's nothing going on in that area. And we understand the United States government is working with Iran, with other nations, with the P5+1. And this has nothing to do with nuclear. And I've said this in the past. This has to do with getting into their natural resources, getting into their central bank, putting their natural resources on the dollar. Because we have to remember the goal is always the same. They need to get into Iran and Syria. These are the last two countries. And eventually they're going to have to double back and restore the puppet governments to all the other countries that they've overthrown. And if this method doesn't work, they will invade Iran. And we can see already that preparing for this. The Persian Gulf states, like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they're saying, listen, we need assurances that there's going to be peace in the region, but we need to be prepared if there isn't. So what they're saying is, if this deal falls apart and we don't get the natural resources and we can't implement a central bank and we don't put the dollar on the oil, then we're going to need to go to war. So we need weapons at this point in time. And the Persian Gulf states are saying, listen, we are requesting fighter jets, missile batteries, surveillance equipment. We definitely want the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. I don't know why they want that. It's full with bugs and it's a complete disaster. But they're calling for all this weaponry because they know when things go south, if this deal is ever made, if the deal isn't made, they still want this equipment because they know eventually they're going to do what they're doing in Yemen. They're going to mount an offensive. That's it, period. I mean, Turkey right now has been looking at China for missile systems. Now they're looking at Russia for missile systems, and Turkey is part of NATO. They're playing both sides at this time. The United States has approved a $21 million sale to Jordan of Black Hawk helicopters to transport the royal family and high-level officials. In Yemen, we understand the situation is getting worse day by day. Saudi Arabia is mounting a ground offensive. They tried once just to get in there, and they were pushed back by the Houthis. We see the Houthis now are gaining ground in Aden. They've taken over one of the neighborhoods. We see the U.S. is out there telling us that, oh, okay, we're doing the bombings, we're orchestrating everything that's going on there, and now we're going to give them humanitarian aid of $68 million. This is what they do in every country. They start a war, they bomb, they try to remove the government, and all the people they kill, hurt, maim, displace, they send humanitarian aid. So they're paying for the war, and they're paying for the damage, all at the same time. And if you notice, in each one of these countries, every time the United States gets involved, there's always a humanitarian crisis. Always. And they are the cause of it. And when I say the U.S., I mean the U.S. government. I'm not talking about the people of the United States. Just like when I talk about France, I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the government. Israel, I'm talking about the government, not the people. And we can see right now governments have their own agendas, and a lot of times it's not what the people want at all. Now, in Iraq, it seems that the Islamic State is making moves in that country, and we have to be clear of what's going on here. The people inside Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Yemen, these are the people who are sick and tired of the puppet government, and they want their country back. They threw in the Islamic State to create chaos. And every time they want to say that, oh, the Islamic State is making a move, oh, the Islamic State is moving on an oil refinery, most of the time, and I would say 99.999% of the time, it is the people of the country who want the country back. They are the ones who are moving towards taking over the country. And they're intermixing the Islamic State in there to say that they are the terrorist force. Now, they used to do this with Al-Qaeda, where they say, all these people who are against the new government, they are Al-Qaeda. But really what they are the people of the country, who want their country back. And we can see right now the people in Iraq are trying to take over the oil refinery. And basically, this is what happened in Libya. The Libyan people were fighting in that country. They took over the oil fields. They took over the ports. They took over the refineries. The same thing in Yemen. Same thing's happening in Lebanon. And the same thing is happening in Iraq right now. Out in Syria, we see Assad is going to reinforce his troops in northwest Syria. It looks like he's having major problems. And we see right now the United States government central bankers, they are on the path right now to do something in Syria, because we could see already the propaganda coming out of the United States saying, listen, we know that Syria is using chlorine gas, and now the U.S. is leading an effort to assign the blame on Assad. And they're doing this once again, just like they did with the sarin gas, which was completely a false flag event. And they do this time and time again because they're trying to show that he's a dictator, he's killing his own people. But it makes no sense because the people of that country voted for him. It was a landslide vote. He's in power. And the only group in Syria that's been using chlorine gas is the Islamic State, is the Free Syrian Army, the rebels that the United States trains. And we can see the Free Syrian Army, they want a safe haven in Syria from all the places where the Islamic State moved Assad's troops out. And now they're saying they own this territory. So this safe haven they want the protection from the United States. And right now, NATO is going to attempt an interim government in these areas, almost like the Libyan model, to try to force the country away from Assad. So they could say, this portion of the country is no longer part of Syria, which means we can establish a U.S. base there, which means NATO can come in, which means we can fight from these positions. This is what they've been doing all along. Now, while this is happening, the Islamic State is headed towards Damascus to get who? Assad. Now, of course, we have more and more propaganda coming out of the U.S. corporate news and the U.S. government central bankers. They're trying to convince us now that the Islamic State is opening up a 5-star resort in Mosul. And they're saying that, not many people are going to go there. Most of the people in this hotel are going to be maybe the Islamic State leadership, which makes no sense. Think about it. They're going to open up a hotel, and the Islamic State leadership is going to go there. Well, isn't this the perfect time to get them? They know, you know exactly where they are. It makes no sense. Basically what they're doing, they picked out a hotel in this area where the people have controlled. They made a deal with them. They raised the flags up. They took a snapshot and say, now we have the hotel. It's a very simple thing to do to fool everybody. We see now that the entire false flag event in Texas was completely botched. It didn't do what they were supposed to do here. And we see a lot of alternative media, new media, and even corporate media coming out saying, Pam Geller is not for freedom of speech. She orchestrated everything here. And of course, the message now is that, the Islamic State is coming after her. Well, this is propaganda to convince everyone that, the Islamic State is here and they're coming after everyone. And she's trying to include herself in this. But guess what? It is too late. But what's very interesting about this is what comes up June 1st. That's right. The Patriot Act. And we have to remember the Patriot Act is set to expire. And all of a sudden, we had an attack from the Islamic State. And the reason why all of this is happening, and remember, this is all for many different agendas why this happens. One of them is to convince people that we still need the Patriot Act because Section 215, the lone wolf provision, and the roving wiretap provision will be dropped. And basically, the NSA, the FBI, who's been interpreting this section where they can spy on everyone, it will disappear. And this is why they're trying to push the U.S. Freedom Act, which is basically the same as the Patriot Act. And this is why we're starting to see this terror. And the other reason is to convince people that the Islamic State is coming to get us, because they also have the authorization for war in Congress. And now we see the Islamic State is out there, and they're sending the message that they have 71 trained soldiers, 23 signed up for missions like Sunday. They are in 15 different states, and they are ready to go. They're ready to pull this off. They're ready to bring America to its knees. Unless the Patriot Act is passed, reinstated. So you can see what they're doing here. Now, are they getting ready for the main event? Well, we don't know for sure. But we can see there's a lot of propaganda coming out, and we know if this goes live and they get the green light, because we know all agents have been pre-positioned. Things have been in motion. Things have been planned for a very long time. This just didn't happen yesterday. This was already done, ready to go, just like 9/11. They just didn't come out one day and say, hey, let's fly a plane into the towers. That was orchestrated and planned by the CIA, by Assad, and many other people for a long time. It took a major intelligence state actor to pull that off. The same thing is happening right now. And they're basically telling us that, yes, this is going to happen. The question is, when? And we have to be awake enough to say, we caught you. False flag, false flag. This is you raining down terror on us to convince us that we need to go to war. To convince us that it's time for us to go fight. To convince us to remove more of our rights. And guess what? At this point in time, this is the time for the American people to stand up and say, no, we are not going along with this. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.